It was hard to teach and be recorded, but okay, fine. Great, so we'll get started. I'm Sarah Walkenfeld. Really, I should have introduced myself first, actually, since we've been chatting this whole time. I'm the Director of Education for Safaria. I come to the work with Safaria really from a Jewish education background. Prior to this, I worked for Hillel for 5 years. I was the Director of Education, the Center for Jewish Life, which is at Princeton University. I currently, as sort of part of the overall package of my Safaria responsibilities, I teach Talmud to 12th graders at the Ida Crown Jewish Academy here in Chicago, which is where I'm located. So my background is in Jewish education and not in technology per se, but as you know, I think we all agree that you can't anymore separate out technology from teaching if you ever could. Even books are a technology, but nowadays with so many schools bringing in one-to-one programs and where technology integration coordinator is a job that one could have. I don't think they had those in my school growing up. So they're sort of inseparable, and it's a great space to be occupying. The nexus between Jewish studies and technology, I think, is a very fruitful field. I think I can say that to people who work with or are starting to work with the virtual high school, because that's really what it's all about. And I just think that's a field where there's still a lot of thinking to be done, a lot of work to be done, and I'm really excited that that's part of what I get to do in my daily job. So I'm going to show you Safaria. That introduction is also meant to give you the sense that I'm going to present Safaria to you as an educator and not as an engineer, which I am not. But if there are questions about sort of the technical side of things, I'm happy to refer you to the appropriate person. So if my answers seem guided by an educational focus, they are, and if they seem a little bit lacking in tech expertise, that is also true. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Actually, I have Zoom open now. Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I want to show you a couple of things today. Primarily Safaria, but I'm also going to show you a few things that we're building. Okay. So here's Safaria. Safaria is a living library of Jewish texts. That's our tagline. First and foremost, it's a database for Jewish texts. And of course, there are other programs out there, there are other websites out there where you can access Jewish texts online. What's different about Safaria? A number of things. We want our text to be easily accessible and freely reusable. So our code is open source and our texts are freely reusable. They're either in the public domain or licensed under a Creative Commons license that makes them freely reusable. And that's the difference. There aren't copyright restrictions. We also hope and work for our text to be beautifully presented and beautifully structured, so that it should be a site that people enjoy using, that feels intuitive and natural, and very similar to inhabiting a space like a Beit Midrash that's full of Jewish books, where you can easily move from one source to another, maybe in some cases more easily because we have more translations maybe than your average Beit Midrash. So this navigation menu up here in the left-hand corner brings you to our library of texts. I'm going to click this More button to give you the full list. And you can switch between English and Hebrew, depending on sort of your language of choice for browsing books. People sometimes ask me if Safaria has everything. I tell them that everyone's everything is different, but we are working on having some version of everything. We've identified around 1,000 core texts that we hope to have within the next few years. That's the plan, and we hope to have them as much as possible in both Hebrew and English. And then we can talk about some of the other everythings that are out there and adding some more sources. But it is definitely the case that we have a pretty good library of text already. We're constantly adding text, and we're very open to feedback. So if any other educator you know looks at this list and says, this is missing this text, which I frequently teach, I frequently use in my classroom, we're very open to trying to get that. Our limitation, of course, is copyright. So if the book that you frequently use in your classroom is, copyright 2005, we might have more difficulty getting that text. We'd have to work with the publisher to see if that's possible, as opposed to a traditional text, which is no longer under copyright. I think I will open up, I could click on any one of these texts and it will take me into it. So I could go into Genesis, open a chapter of Genesis. I can also view these by parsha instead of by chapter, and do it that way. And similarly with the Talmud, you can view it by daf or by chapter. I think I'll actually go into this week's parsha. Safari always has a link for the parsha, the Haftarah, and Daf Yomi. So I'll just click on parsha. And I should say that my Safari will run a little slow for me, and maybe for you also while you run Zoom. I know for me it slows it down, so I apologize for that little couple of second delay. It shouldn't happen for you if you're using Safari without running Zoom at the same time. You could see that the text opened for me. I'm in English. Safari gives you language controls in the upper right-hand corner, so I can switch into Hebrew, Hebrew English, or English. I'll leave myself in Hebrew English right now. And what I'm viewing is the text in the center and the connections to the text running down the right-hand side. A connection can be anything that's connected. Most obvious would be commentaries. So you can see a number of commentaries on the Torah here, but it could also be a piece of Talmud that quotes that verse. It could be a philosophical work that quotes a verse. It could be a halachic work that references a verse, either directly quoting it or just alluding to it. All those sources are connections. This chapter of Genesis has 853 sources that are connected to it, which is a lot of sources, more than your average teacher might read through in a given year. So you can click on the filter button in the bottom right-hand corner and see just the commentaries or just the connections that you want to see. I can click commentary and Rashi and click back out, and now I'm viewing just the text with Rashi on the side. And I could filter for any text that I want to see and just view it that way. The text is linked to the specific verse that it comments on. So there's a hover over effect. As you hover over a verse, it will show you which source you're looking at on the side. And I can click into any of these sources to open it up. And I can even make that the main text. If I want Rashi to be my central text, I can do that by clicking on it. And now connections to Rashi are on the side. This could be a lot of different things to different people. You as a teacher might use this to prepare. You might use this to do your research. You might use this to move through sources. And students also could use this to move through sources. So in a traditional classroom, I might project this on the board. In a virtual classroom, and I should have said I did spend a year teaching an online class as well. So in a virtual classroom, this might be a way for a student and teacher alike to be looking at the same text at the same time. Of course, there's also an element of freedom here where I could decide to follow up on Rashi and you could have decided to follow up on Rashbam or some other commentary. Right? There's a way in which you're moving from book to book, and students can do that. Students, teachers, anyone who's looking at their own screen can do that without necessarily impacting someone else's view, and without moving off the site. I'm just opening another tab because I know it's going to run slow right there. So that's in the text.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi. Is that Boaz?
It's Boaz. How are you?
Hi, Boaz. How are you?
Good, good, good.
Good to see you. Actually, I can't see you, but it's good to hear your voice.
Good to hear you.
Great. I'm going to go back into a text for a sec just to show you one more thing. Again, thinking more along the lines of teaching online, or maybe just, I should say, teaching with a digital focus where students are using devices and teachers are using devices. We also have a note feature on Safaria. I'm going to show you some notes that I took so you can get a sense of what it looks like. We have a notes feature on Safaria that's down here at the bottom. Most texts will say 0 notes. Mine right now says 21 notes because I've taken my own notes on, this is the text that I happen to be teaching this year. This is Parak HaChovel. So when I click, it says 21 notes. They're just my notes for teaching, but they are available to me online. They're linked to the text. So when I click on a specific line, Safaria tells me exactly what I wanted to say about that particular line. And it's a mishmash of things. It's articles that I want to remember to give them. It's vocabulary words. It's Rashis that we need to focus on. It's all sorts of things, but my notes are all here. And students also can keep their notes in sort of an online portfolio on Safaria. This is a feature we'd like to build out more to give teachers and students more options. Maybe you want students to be able to take notes and then share them with the class or share them with the teacher. Maybe they want to be able to export them to a Google Doc. Maybe there needs to be more types of notes. We're working on ways of being able to share notes with one another via Safari. So that's all kind of in the works, hopefully, eventually to happen. Okay, any questions before I go on to the source sheets? It's a quick walk through our sources, but I want to spend most of our time on source sheets. Okay, great. So everything that I just showed you, as I said, it's freely available, it's freely reusable. You and or your students could access this at any time. You just need internet and a device. That device could be a laptop, a computer, a phone, a tablet. We are currently working on building an Android app and an iPhone app, so those are coming soon. You don't need to be logged in or anything in order to see those source sheets. In order to see those sources or read through those sources, it's a tool that's available to everyone. The other side of Safari, the other piece of Safari that we built is our source sheet builder. So I sort of randomly opened up, I wasn't really paying attention to what I was doing, but opened up to a chapter in Gradesheet. And you can see, in addition to the connections information, right, there's 758 sources available. There's my filter button. There are no notes here. But there are 29 source sheets that use this chapter. So when I click on this 29 sheets, I'm looking at source sheets that are publicly available on Safari. Safari is a platform for resource sharing. We don't force you to share things on Safari. You can make them on Safari and keep them private. I'll speak more about that in a few minutes. But you can also share things. And if you are, for some reason, looking at this Parak Vav of Genesis and thinking, what do people teach about when they teach about Gradesheet Vav? So here are some answers, because there are 29 source sheets in this chapter. And these source sheets are all publicly available. And I could click on any one of them and view and decide to even reuse that source sheet. And again, I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But this is another piece of the resources that we offer, is that you could look and say, beginning Jewish history, the idea of the nation, part 1, sounds interesting, and there might be an element there that would help me, would inspire me with my teaching, would help me with my teaching. And the same thing for your students, where they might find interesting resources here. You can take any text and put it onto a source sheet, any text that's in Safari. So if I click on, let's say, this verse, and I get this plus symbol, I hover over the plus sign, I get a number of options, adding a note, which we talked about, I can add it to a source sheet, I can copy it to my clipboard and copy and paste it into Word or something like that. That's not what Safari is optimized for, but you can do that. You can add a source, so you can add your own connection, if there's a connection that you know about or you feel exists and isn't in Safari. You can edit the text, although you can't edit the Bible, we've locked that. But in theory, there are texts that you can edit. You can add your own translation, and you can share the text. If you are very excited about a particular verse or piece of text, you can share it on Facebook, you can tweet it out, you can email it to people. Those are all options. Okay, but we're gonna go with add to source sheet so that you can see what that looks like. So add to source sheet. Okay, it's gonna ask me if I wanna add it to any of my pre-existing source sheets, and I have a lot of them, but I'm going to start a new source sheet. So I just click add, and we will call this OJSC, and click OK. Now it tells me that this verse was added to my source sheet, and I click View Sheet. I could click OK and just keep browsing through text, but I'm clicking View Sheet, and now this takes me to my source sheet. People are used to thinking of source sheets one of two ways. Either it's a piece of paper that you hand out to students or your teacher hands to you, or it's a file, in Microsoft Word, right? It's something that I've created on my computer. This is a different kind of source sheet. And one of the major tensions that we're working through right now at Safari is trying to figure out how to speak differently about a product that is really a digital product and not an analog product, or really something that could go in either direction. So I could print out this source sheet right now. It would look basically just the way it does on my screen, but that's not the focus that I'm going to adopt for us today, since I know this is really about teaching online. And there are a lot of things that you can do with Safari source sheets if you're not kind of caught up in the need to print them. So we'll focus on this as more of an analog product, as more of a digital product than an analog product. and it exists as a web page. Once you've created a source sheet on Safaria, hopefully you can see, it might be small when you're viewing my screen. Can you guys see this URL at the top here? Right up there. Great. So every source sheet that's created on Safari gets its own URL. And if I wanted to share this with someone, I would just copy and paste this URL. The same as if I wanted to tell somebody about a product on Amazon, right? I would just send them the link. So you could just send them the link to the source sheet. That's how the source sheet exists. You've basically just made your own web page. The source sheet has the same controls, same language controls as a text would. So you can switch back and forth. It could be, whoops, I'm getting caught up in Zoom. It could be all English. It could be English Hebrew. It could be Hebrew. And you know, its potential is retained throughout. You don't have to pick one or the other. You can keep switching back and forth. If you're in Hebrew English, you can switch where the sources appear side by side, one on top of the other, all of those things. And now that I have my source sheet created, let me go back to side by side, I can add more sources to it. So this add button, you can add a source from within Safaria. You could type in a citation, or so let's say Genesis 2, 1 through 5, and then I hit enter. That's added to my source sheet. I can add a source by browsing sources. I'm not exactly sure what the span is that I want. I'm not exactly sure, let's say, where to find it on the page of Talmud. I can just browse my way through this menu of texts and add a text that way. You can also add an outside text. So basically the rule is if it's digital, you can add it to your source sheet. If you have it somewhere saved in your Microsoft Word, if it's a Wikipedia article, a New York Times article, a text on the Bar Ilan DVD, I don't know, you can help me out if there are other places that you add text from that I'm missing. But anything, this is not an issue of copyright, this is fair use, the same as you would add anything to a source sheet that you would make, any other way. So you can add a source to Safaria. You can add a comment, which might be a comment, or it might be a question for your students, right? Questions to think about while reading the source. You can do it that way, and you can also add media. So a video, audio recording, any kind of media, something that you've created or something that you've found on YouTube, you can embed that in a Safaria source sheet. And even teaching in a traditional classroom, I do flipped classroom lessons this way. So I'll put a text on the source sheet and then embed a video of myself teaching that source. Usually then, and ask the students, some follow-up questions about that. And I'll talk more about getting their answers on that in a minute. But you can actually put all those materials into a Safaria source sheet and have students interact with it that way. Our options menu, most of this is pretty self-explanatory. You can substitute out by names, number sources, box sources. You can make a copy of the sheet. You can embed the sheet into a different website. So if there's a learning management system that you use, I think, Lisa, that you had told me that the virtual high school uses its own system. So you can embed Safaria source sheets into any other website, any blog, any other system. This button just gives you some embed code that you can put in, and you can do it that way. You can edit sheet tags, which addresses the question that I often get from educators who are used to making source sheets, which is like, sort of, how will I ever find this again? So I'll tag this sheet demo and save it that way. And you can see when I go out to source sheets, I'm logged in right now, and in order to work on source sheets, you need to be logged in. So don't go to Safaria. It won't, and have it expect to look like this for you. This is my version of Safaria. But these are my source sheets. You can see I have a lot, but they are at least as organized as they are on my computer. In reality, actually a lot more organized. They're tagged, and obviously tags work a little differently than folders. You can have multiple tags for a single source sheet. So I can find all my source sheets about Abraham, or all my source sheets about Masechet Ta'anit, or whatever it is, just by clicking on that tag, and it'll show me all the source sheets that have that tag. And those are private tags that only you can see as long as you keep the source sheet private. Going back to this menu, you can print, you can also export to a PDF, but of course PDFs are harder to work with digitally. So if what you're doing is presenting material to students online, then I highly recommend keeping the source sheet in this format. Of course, if you want to print it out for yourself as a PDF, or it's export it to a PDF and then print it. Sometimes people want to export it as a PDF and then save it on their computers. That's also possible. Also, options within the source sheet, I really encourage you to play around with it. That's the only way to get a full sense of everything that you can do with it. But you can click into a source and then make changes to it. You get a text editor, so colors, fonts, alignment, bold, underline, all those things are possible. And when you hover over a text on Safari, you get this menu, which lets you do a number of, again, sort of formatting things. You can edit the source. You can add a subsource, which is just a source kind of indented underneath, takes you to our text menu again. You can add a comment to attach specifically to that source. My favorite button, you can add all connections. I like being able to do that easily. I spent too long actually copying and pasting. So if I want to add, let's say, Rashi and Sforno on this verse, I just check the little boxes and click add. And now 5 sources were added to my source sheet. And that was much easier than it otherwise would have been. You can reset the source text if you've made changes to it. You can delete a source. You can copy a source to another sheet, a new sheet or a sheet that previously existed as a source you want to reuse for multiple purposes. And you can change the source layout language individually. So even though my source sheet overall is bilingual, once I realize that this Rashi doesn't have any English, I might change the setting and just click on all Hebrew and then click OK. And now it's showing me just this text is all Hebrew. The other texts are still bilingual. So I have that flexibility as well. What I really want to talk to you about, once you get good at creating these source sheets, it's not magic. It's like learning any other technology. If you can get good at using Microsoft Word, then you can get good at using Safari to create a source sheet. But more interesting to us right now at Safari, although we're still interested in hearing your feedback about other features that should exist. If there are technical things in terms of you want to be able to move this there or that there, we're very interested in hearing your feedback. But even more interesting is the question of how teachers and students can interact over source sheets. So we have a sharing option on Safari. That's this button here. And each one of these is sort of a pedagogic decision to be made. Private, only people with a direct link can view the source sheet. You could decide that what you want to do with your students is teach them from this source sheet. I can keep it private, and as I said, I can send out this link to all my students, to all my colleagues, whomever it is that should see the source sheet, and say, we're going to be learning from this tomorrow, so everyone please pull this up on your screen while we're learning. That would be one way of doing things. Or, I'm sending out the lesson, and the lesson is contained entirely in this source sheet, in that there are sources and there are questions, and the assignment is to submit via email your answers to these questions. That would be one kind of method of using our source sheets if you keep it private. You can make it listed for Safari users, which is another way of saying a public source sheet. Anyone browsing Safari can find and view your source sheet. That might not change how you use it with your students. That goes to the question of resource sharing, which is something that we at Safari are very interested in, whether and how educators share resources with one another. Anyone can add. Anyone browsing Safari can find and view and add sources and comments to your sheet, or anyone can add unlisted. Is the one I'm more likely to use with my students. Anyone can add unlisted means that if I send you all the link here, then you can all add your answers to the questions that I've put on the source sheet. And that may mean that I've made multiple copies of the sheet, one for each of you, and you can each add your answers. So this is actually not just that the assignment is contained on this sheet, but you're going to submit your answers this way. And maybe your answers, by the way, aren't just going to be text where I add a comment and ask you to write your answer. Maybe I'm going to ask you to add a relevant source, or we've seen X number of sources in this class, and I'd like you to add one that you think is relevant, which you could even do by going back to our past class source sheets and copying the source onto the source sheet. But you could answer me in text if I give you that option, and not just by writing your answer. By the way, if I tell my students it's possible, they could also answer me with images, with media, etc. And sometimes I do give my students that ability to say, if this inspires you to think of a clip on YouTube, go ahead and add that there also. Or it could be that this is a shared space for the entire class to work together. Obviously, that works better with certain types of questions than with others, I use it if I'm working on something that involves thought questions. So, here, I'm going to show you one that I did with my students. This source sheet has first a video embedded at the top. So this is a video actually of me reading the text for my students. It was a review exercise, so they'd already learned this, and I read it, I punctuated it, I translated it, and I color-coded it in the system that my class learns. And then I have the text and then questions that the students had to answer. This is already broken up, but here are my questions. My students had to answer them. You can see every time they answer a question, their name automatically appears underneath what they've added. And I had them drag their answers around so that it responded to the piece of text they were commenting on or the comment that they were responding to. So sometimes you get sort of like a string of comments where one says something and another one responds and another one responds to that. And this is sort of a discussion board, a shared space for them to create a conversation. And we use this as a jumping off point for class the next day. Really a place for us to sort of see how far we had come together and think about what issues we still wanted to address together in class. So you can think of it as a substitute for a blog or a discussion board, but the texts are already there. Students and teachers can both add texts. We also have on our sharing options an anyone can edit mode. It's going to give you this alarming warning message. You should make a copy of the source sheet before allowing anyone to edit because we don't track changes. And you can do that again by publicly listing it or not. But that will allow you to allow students to make changes to the source sheet. So if the goal is to have students, let's say, punctuate a text or color code a text in some way. So you can generate a copy of the source sheet for each student and have them work on it that way. Or again, have one copy that multiple students are working on, depending on what you want them to do. So that's another sharing option and another way for students to work with texts and on texts. I was just having this conversation with an educator earlier today about how much we let our students work hands-on with text. This is one way to do that. Or again, just to have students provide answers for questions in a kind of all-in-one space where you have the text, the question, and then the student can also add the answer. I'm going to pause for any questions or comments before I go on, I think. Okay. You could also chat questions to me, but I might or may not see them. So just stop me if you have a question or comment. I think this is the way to go for now. Okay, I'm going back out to source sheets. As I mentioned before, we have public source sheets as well as private ones in Safaria. We are just now starting to come to grips with the fact that we currently have about 20,000 source sheets on Safaria, and around something like 2,500 of those are public. So it's a very small percentage of what we have that's actually publicly available, which is kind of interesting to think about, but okay, conversation for another time maybe. In the meantime, we do have around 2,500 source sheets that are publicly available. So here they all are. They are tagged and arranged alphabetically. So if you want to look for some inspiration because you're teaching about, I guess right now we'll start with something that begins with an A. So you're teaching about Aaron, for example. So there are 20 source sheets about Aaron. And any one of these source sheets, you can click on it and it is freely reusable, which means you'll get the options menu and you can click to copy the sheet. And it will tell you source sheet copied. When you view the copy, so it's a source sheet by me based on a source sheet by OJSC. And I can choose to edit that if I want to. We hope that people will always retain some sort of attribution. But I might just use this for inspiration and sort of play around with it. It also means that as a teacher, you can create a source sheet and then ask your students to create spin-offs of that source sheet. So you could start with 2 sources and then ask each student to generate their own copy where they're going to work with the sources in a given way. Our engineers right now are working on an assignments feature so that if you want to generate those copies for your students, you could do that automatically without them having to go through the trouble of going in and clicking copy. So that's something that's in the works. Again, if you want students working on an individual copy of the source sheet, beyond just reading it, right? If you want them to actually interact with the sources and be answering questions or punctuating a source or using it. So those are our publicly available source sheets. Again, it's a growing collection, and that is also the best way right now to search thematically on Safaria. So if you're searching for text, we have a search bar at the top of the screen, which I'm worried that Zoom is blocking right now, but we always have a search bar up here, and you can type in a word in Hebrew or in English and search for it. So if you want to search by theme, the best way right now is to go into our public source sheets and see what tags we have available, and see if there's anything there that interests you, that inspires you, that seems like a good jumping off point for you as you build your own source sheet. Any questions up till there? Okay. We're also interested in building other kinds of features on Safaria, and then thinking about how teachers might be able to integrate that into source sheets or into their teaching more broadly. We just released an authors feature on Safaria. This came out last week. So all of our authors on Safaria now exist as sort of encyclopedia entries. And if you click on any one of them, you can see a little biography. There's links to other sources to learn more, all of their works, and a map of where they lived, where they died, where they wrote things, and this hover over feature gives you some details. Eventually, I hope this will be a more interactive product so that students could create maps that encompass multiple figures that they've learned about. Teachers could create maps for their students, all those kinds of things. We're looking at creating timelines as well. Again, digital products that students and teachers would interact with together and would interact with digitally, whether that's an integrated classroom or without ever being in the same place at the same time. So that's one piece that we built. We also have our Link Explorer, which is another way of working with the data that we've gathered. The Link Explorer is all the connections between the Talmud and the Tanakh. This is hopefully not too hard to see as you're viewing my screen. Better sometimes on your own individual screen. So many lines that it can be hard to see. But I essentially have the entire Bible running across the top of my screen and the entire Talmud running across the bottom. And each line represents a case where the Talmud quotes a verse from the Bible. And if I click on it, it will open up that text, and I can read the text. And I can click also to sort of drill down if I just want to see the connections between and the entire Talmud. I can click to see that as well. So this is really, I'm showing this to you, well, actually for two reasons. Mostly as an example of the kind of thing that Safaria hopes to build in the future. We're very interested in connections between texts, and sort of the whole foundation for Safaria is this recognition, which obviously we're not the first ones to realize, that Jewish texts are so interconnected, and the internet was made for Jewish texts in some ways. And that's something that, I think that's another way in which Safaria makes Jewish texts more accessible, that you as the teacher know about that interconnectivity, and students don't necessarily. And not every page is footnoted. If you open a Bible, it's not footnoted to show you all the ways in which other texts are connected. Safaria shows you that. We visualize that by showing you the text in the middle and the connections running down the side. And this is just another way of presenting that data. Ultimately, the vision is to be able to put any two books together, so any book on top and on the bottom, or side by side, or whatever it is, and be able to show the connections between those two books. The idea would be to be able to create some kind of custom view so that whatever you're learning, whatever your students are engaged with, they can see the way in which those texts connect to one another. So that's an eventual. For now, this exists as, again, a tool that has to do with Tanakh and Talmud. I guess the other piece here is that I do think that there's pedagogic value to this tool, even as it is. I have used it in class, but I'll leave that as an open question for you, whether those of you who teach traditional Jewish texts sort of find value in that in and of itself. Questions up till there? Okay. One more piece to show you, or at least one more piece to show you, though it's not, let's see, this bar is annoying me. Though it isn't publicly available yet, we do have a mock-up of a redesign of our site. And actually, if you go to Safaria on mobile, if you try navigating to Safaria on your phone, this is more or less what it looks like. But this also has sort of interesting implications in terms of online teaching, in terms of showing students texts digitally and expecting them to read them that way, to interact with them that way. This is what Safari will eventually look like. And you can see, and it's redesigned, it looks different, hopefully it looks better. We think it looks better. Similar in terms of structure, there's a menu of text. You can open any text that you want to open. You still have a language navigator. I'll open it up in Hebrew and English, and you can see what that looks like. But when I click on a text, I get this additional panel here, and I can open any commentary. So I don't see all the commentaries running down the side. At a certain point, we thought that got too overwhelming, but I can pick what I want to open. And I could also decide that instead of opening a commentary next to, where am I, the 3rd chapter of Genesis, instead I could open another chapter of Genesis, or I could open any other text that I want to. By clicking up here, I can get to our full menu of text. So anyone who teaches two texts side by side for any reason, you have that flexibility. And you can open a 3rd panel as well if you want to see a text, another text, and a commentary on those texts. I think 3 panels is as far as we've gone so far. But sort of an interesting thing to think about. It's meant to more closely mimic the experience of opening multiple books one next to another. And again, just give people maximal flexibility in terms of the experience of looking at text digitally, which we think has sort of advantages over the book method, but of course is different and has drawbacks and et cetera. So hopefully this is a more pleasant learning and viewing experience. Okay, pausing again for questions or comments. How am I doing on time? Okay, great. So no more comments, so I'll show you maybe 1 or 2 more things quickly. Again, a difference between the text side of Safaria and the source sheet side. On the text side, you don't have to be logged in. Anyone can access these sources. If you want to interact with source sheets, you need to be logged in. Your students need to be logged into Safaria. So just to view a source sheet, they don't need to be, but if you want them to add comments, they'll need to be logged in as themselves or as somebody, and we don't check their identities. And this is our recent activity page on Safaria, which it sort of tracks what's been going on Safaria. We haven't done a lot with this, but I think it's just interesting to know. We did do a little work. This actually happened very early on, with sort of gamifying the site. So people earn points by doing activity on the site. If you publish a source sheet publicly, then you get points. And in the day schools that I work in, I found that whereas teachers felt that teachers often keep their source sheets private, teachers assumed that students would keep their source sheets private, and students actually love publishing their source sheets and seeing their name up here on our leaderboard. And then source sheets, public source sheets, can also get likes. And if you've grown up getting used to being liked on Facebook, then you can easily get used to being liked on Safaria. And students take to that as well. It's a different model, definitely. It's a shift for students to be making source sheets and not only the teachers. But we increasingly see that, especially in students in schools that are using classrooms that are using more of a project-based learning model, or just encouraging students to work with texts more independently. In addition to just source sheets that have questions or activities in them, and the students are expected to interact that way. Okay, pausing once more for questions, comments, etc. Okay, still not great. So last thing, I'll just say again, really the best way to learn about how to use source sheets on Safaria is to, in fact, create a source sheet on Safaria. There is a bit of a learning curve, and whatever it is that you've been doing, I generally find, I don't stereotype anyone, but I generally find that whatever it is that you've been doing to make source sheets, you're convinced that that's easy, whether or not it actually is, because that's what you're used to, and you've already gotten over that learning curve. But in fact, there's a learning curve for everything, and I think Safaria is relatively easy, but there is that hump to get over. So I encourage you, if you're interested, to try making a source sheet on Safaria, to contact me if you I tell people I really am Safaria's help feature right now because we don't have another help feature. So I can chat you all my email address, or actually probably Lisa can share it, but it's Sarah, S-A-R-A, at safaria.org. And as I said, I am the best person to contact with these questions, so if it's on the technical side, I'll refer you to an engineer. And I'm always happy to help, especially sort of learning to build source sheets. So build a source sheet, experiment with it. At the moment, we have an educator contest that we just launched yesterday. Let's see if I can find any here. Oh, yeah, look at that. So we're encouraging people either to make source sheets or actually to, even if they've already made a source sheet, to make it public. And this tag, Spreading the Light 2015, is our contest tag and enters you in the contest. And you have to look at the Safari email to be reminded of what the prizes are, but there are prizes. And we're excited about that. Oh, look at that. A lot of people have added to the contest, so that's exciting. So we do periodically run these contests. This is one that we're running right now. And again, I really think the best way to get used to making source sheets on Safari is to just create one. You can start with a private one or make it public and enter a contest, but start playing around with those different features. And then really the next step after that is to think about what interactive pieces can you add. I mean, I understand from speaking with Lisa that the virtual high school classes are, it's online, and you're essentially creating assignments for students to complete, for students to sort of interact with you via the text or via the assignments that you give them. And I think Safari is a powerful space for that. Again, we have the capacity for audio, for video, for images, for texts, and for your own text or comments. And I think that there's, we're sort of keeping a running list, and I can share with you if you're interested, a list that we currently have of ways in which teachers have been experimenting with Safaria. But the idea behind that list is that it's a growing list, and so we're always interested in hearing both about new ways that teachers think of to use the technology that we have, as well as suggestions for technology that you would want us to build to create a more compelling product for your needs and the needs of your students. So I'll stop, but I'll happily stay on for a few minutes for questions if anyone has them. And again, I'd encourage you to try playing around with things and then let me know if you have questions from there. Any final questions? I feel like people have been jumping on and off because I only see Boaz and Chaim right now, but I could have sworn there was another person or two on there somewhere in the middle. Right? No, you guys are good. Okay, so please feel free to be in touch if you have any questions. And oh no, I do see one more person. Okay. Please.
Ariel was here and had to go off to to candlelighting with her school, but she's.
Got it. Okay. So I was looking for all the other people that were on there. Great. So again, definitely feel free to contact me if you have more questions. Oh look, now I see things on chat. Great. So I'm chatting out my email address again, just so that you have it. And feel free to let me know if you have questions or jump in now if you want to add anything before we sign off. Lisa, I think you're talking, but I can't hear you.
I wanted to say thank you very much, Sarah. You're an amazing presenter, and I really enjoy hearing you and your exuberance for this site, which is so useful. And I think the source sheets are just an incredible tool, incredible educational tool.
Great. So thank you so much, guys, and feel free to be in touch really at any time. I'm happy to hear your questions, your ideas, your feedback at any point.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm sorry, Sarah.
Thank Lisa too.
Thank you, Monica.
All right.
And Lisa, thank you for arranging this.
No, my pleasure. I enjoyed it too.
Okay, bye-bye, guys.
Sarah, can we do some? Can I share that recording with the people who missed it?
Yes. Here, I'll stop the video now. Thanks for reminding me.